Thank you everyone for joining. We'll start in a minute or so, just waiting for others to join as well. Great. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Before we start, I'm just going to remind us of a few housekeeping rules. Simultaneous interpretation is available in Ukrainian today, so you can activate this feature at the bottom of your screen by selecting Ukrainian language. Others can just select English if you don't need the interpretation. If you have any issues, please let us know via the chat, and one of our colleagues is going to try to help you with that. The closed captions are available today, so you'll be able to see them in the toolbar at any time, so just feel free to enable that. Please note that participants will not be able to use the microphone function, but you will find a Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. So share your questions and comments in the chat at any time. And if you'd like, we encourage you, if you feel comfortable to share your name, your organization, country. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. We'll collect all the questions as they come in. If you'd like to address them to a specific panelist, please do so. If not, we can also address to the speakers at the end according to their experiences. And we will get back to all of those questions at the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And finally, the webinar is being live streamed and will be available on Redress's channel as well. So thank you again for joining us today. My name is Renata Polici. I am a senior legal advisor at Redress, and I have the pleasure to moderate today's discussion. This webinar is part of Redress's In Practice series. It aims to promote exchanges on strategic litigation and contribute to a growing community of practice. So we also invite you to follow our In Practice series for other webinars as well. And today's discussion is also organized under the United Against Torture Consortium. And the consortium brings together six of the world's leading anti-torture organizations with the aim to strengthen and to expand the anti-torture movement by pooling our expertise in different areas, including torture prevention, protection, survivor rehabilitation, and strategic litigation against torture. Under the United Against Torture Consortium, Redress works with the Association for the Prevention of Torture, APT, the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, IRCT, the International Federation of ACATs, FIACAT, the Omega Research Foundation, and the World Organization Against Torture, OMCT. And together with this group, we work alongside over 200 organizations around the world, and we have achieved some real changes and impact on survivors of torture, including securing justice and reparations. And we invite you to read more and find out more about this work in our report that we recently released, which outlines a little bit of the impact of the consortium and our partners globally. So one of my colleagues is going to share the link on the screen, and you can have a look after the webinar. And the consortium work as well. Redress has granted Innovative Lawyers Awards. This is to encourage and to empower an emerging generation of lawyers in the anti-torture movement. And the aim is really to recognize the vital and impressive work conducted by these lawyers, to expose them to a broader network, to learn from their experiences, and to offer some support as they pursue strategic litigation or other initiatives that can really inspire other lawyers and practitioners around the world. And so today in the panel, we're really delighted to have such an insightful and inspiring group of speakers and really look forward to an engaging discussion. Today we have 5 Innovative Lawyers Awards recipients of the Redress Awards, and I'll first introduce Edgar Kaiser, who is a human rights lawyer from India and a recipient of the award at Redress. He works with People's Watch, an organization dedicated to combating injustice and discrimination across India. Edgar has experience combating the challenges faced by human rights defenders and the deep structural inequalities that enable torture and human rights abuses against marginalized communities. Edgar is driven by his work with victims and survivors and also from seeing the real impact that his work has on people's lives. So thank you, Edgar, for joining us. And next, we also will hear from Akwada Masafu. They are a Kenyan-based queer feminist advocate of the High Court in Kenya and legal expert specializing in SOGI and the law. Their work focuses on law, dignity, resistance, and the human rights protections of LGBTQ Kenyans, as well as refugees and asylum seekers. Masafu is a senior program officer at the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission in Kenya, where she coordinates the National Public Legal Aid Service Center and has been recognized with the Legal Champion Award and Redress's Innovative Lawyers Award. So thank you, Masafu, also for joining today's webinar. Next, we have Bunaswari Swain, who's an Indian human rights lawyer and advocate working in civil and criminal litigation, and also a Redress Innovative Lawyers Award recipient. She currently works as an activist at Safe Odisha for Her and as an advocate at the Bar Council of India. They're committed to advancing social justice and empowering vulnerable groups through legal expertise and policy engagement. Thank you also for joining. We also will hear from Kavuta Mutua, and Kavuta Mutua is a Kenyan human rights lawyer in Kenya, and she is the founder and director of the Legal Caravan, an organization that works towards advancing justice and equality. And they do this through community education, legal capacity building, and advocacy, particularly on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Thank you, Kavuta. And last but not least, we also have Mary Nguemo Zwomo, who's a Nigerian human rights lawyer and also recipient of the Redress Innovative Lawyers Award. And as a legal officer at Lawyers Alert, an organization working on human rights in Nigeria, she advocates for vulnerable individuals facing unfair trials, ill treatment, torture, and other human rights violations. So thank you, everyone. We're very pleased to have such a diverse and experienced panel. And now I'll ask a couple of questions to each of you so that we can hear a little bit about your experience. And I will start with Edgar. If you could please share with us, Edgar, one of the most significant structural, legal, or political barrier that you face working against torture in India. We're aware that there may be many challenges, but if you could focus on one or two that you feel that are more significant, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata, for the very kind introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect, thank you. In a country like India, with 1/6 of the world population, and there's no standalone anti-torture law, the single most and the greatest barrier that we face is the impunity. At the core of the accountability crisis is the impunity that is in India. We don't have a legal definition for torture that is consistent with the international standards, as a result of which accountability for torture remains exceptionally difficult to achieve. Equally concerning is the weakening of the institutions that are supposed to investigate abuses by the state officials. The Supreme Court itself has recognized that when police officers themselves investigate allegations of torture against their fellow officers, that their fellow colleagues, they are often in the court's own words, it's bound by brotherhood. That is, that structural conflict of interest lies at the heart of the problem. Let me try to illustrate this with one of the cases that we came across. A young man in his early 20s, a cab driver, was brutally tortured in police custody. The violence was so severe that he developed rhabdomyolysis, a symptom in the brain, and he suffered life-threatening kidney failure. Our colleagues intervened immediately to secure his medical treatment. He underwent 21 consecutive dialysis sessions. He also later told us that he already believed that he was already going to die because he already saw a couple of other custodial violences who endured that, already dying around him in the same hospital. He survived only because of the immediate medical assistance that reached in time because of our colleagues' intervention that was so urgent that he required. But the survival did not actually translate into justice. The CCTV footages that could have established the truth was never produced. The investigation failed to meaningfully examine the allegations. Ultimately, the High Court observed that the boy is still alive and he was recovering, that then there was no need for any further investigation, as if the investigation should be there only if the person dies. The Supreme Court also upheld that conclusion, noting that there was insufficient documentary evidence supporting the violence by police. This was despite the case being argued by one of the finest human rights practitioners in the country, a former Chief Justice of the High Court, and currently who happens to be the chair of the International Independent Commission on Inquiry on Palestine, Justice Muralidhar, who argued the case before the Supreme Court, who recently released a path-breaking report on the deliberate targeting of children in Gaza. Imagine if people of such an impeccable record find it difficult to secure justice for the victims due to systemic barriers. If accountability could not be achieved in a case with compelling medical evidence, experienced legal representation, and sustained advocacy, one must ask what happens to thousands of survivors whose cases never reach the courts or not even reported at all. This is the structural barrier we actually confront on a day-to-day basis, and yet this is not where the story ends. Yesterday, after a really long time, I spoke to this young man, this survivor, and he told me that he's living a happy life. He has rebuilt his life. He completed his schooling from the support of our colleagues, the motivation from our colleagues, and now he is preparing to attend university. He said something that stayed with in my heart, that had our team not ensured his immediate medical care, he would not be alive today. This conversation reminded with me that while impunity remains our greatest challenge, our work is not measured by only convictions and prosecutions of police officers. Every single life saved, every survivor who rebuilds their future, every family that finds hope despite all the injustice that's happening, that too is a form of justice. We will continue fighting for accountability, but until the system changes, we will never abandon those who had survived it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edgar. It's great to hear about the work that you're doing to, improve those investigations. And this is, I think, a challenge that we see across different jurisdictions that we work. And may I ask then, either in this case or in a different initiative, if you'd like, what kind of innovative approach did you adopt that you think it was successful in order to either shift the narrative or to bring justice for the survivors?
Thank you for that question. I wonder the innovation, the aspect of innovation in the human rights work that we do, not just in my country, but all around the world, is actually truly lacking as much as it is found in science or technology. But speaking of innovation, I just want to quote two things in the anti-torture movement. One is the strategic dimension of accountability, and the other one is reparations, because for us, justice cannot exist without both. I come from India, in a country with a colonial policing legacy. As I mentioned, 1/6 of the world population also lives there. It's a large population, yet without an anti-torture law, at a time when brute force is increasingly being used to silence dissent. Ensuring accountability for state violence is extraordinarily difficult. One of the most effective innovations that we've been able to strategically use is, I think, this right to information law that we have been able to use. What was originally enacted as a transparency mechanism has now become an accountability tool in the fight against torture, at least in our organization that we use. The Supreme Court has mandated several structural reforms, including the establishment of independent police complaints authorities, installation of CCTV cameras in police stations, among others. Yet many of these judgments remain largely unimplemented. We use these RTI applications, information, to seek information from the government about their complaints with these Supreme Court rulings. And then we go back to the courts with the evidence of non-compliance, demanding implementation. At the same time, we place this information in the public domain through media, through strength and advocacy, and create pressure for reform. A second dimension of our accountability strategy has been engaging with the international institutions. We have consistently advocated before the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions regarding the failure of India's National Human Rights Commission to fully comply with the Paris Principles. Our objective has never been to downgrade or to put the commission down. These efforts, I think our objective has always been to shame the, not just to shame the commission, but rather to strengthen and to encourage to fulfill its mandate independently to investigate all allegations of torture. Those efforts contributed to the recommendation to downgrade the commission accreditation to B status last year, while we have since observed some improvements by the National Human Rights Commission, which is of course a victory, but meaningful accountability remains work in progress. The second aspect of the innovation that we do, apart from accountability, is the reparation, which is very close to my heart. Our organization is fundamentally survivor-centered, and one of our most formidable survivors, we've always been inspired by her, Angammal, who herself survived through sexual violence and torture, now serves as one of the trustees of our organization. That reflects our belief that survivors should not simply be beneficiaries of our human rights work, they should be at the center of it and lead the struggle. Just a few days ago, during our conference marking the International Day in support of victims of torture, survivor families affected by torture stood before hundreds of people and courageously sharing their stories, and their voices were not symbolic, they were leading the movement. Perhaps one of our most unique initiatives is our annual summer camp that we have for our children from families affected by police torture, a program that we've been running for over 2 decades now. These children often come from historically marginalized communities, many of whom continue to live with the legacy of colonial criminalization. They have witnessed unimaginable violence, fathers being taken away in the middle of the night, brothers returning home with broken limbs, women subjected to sexual violence, and in some cases, even fathers of their families killed in custody or by police firing. Yet the children themselves are almost entirely out of this criminal justice system. For 1 week every year, they come together in a space. They can simply be as children, as a children as they could. They sing, dance, play, learn, laugh, dream about their future, and they realize that they are not alone. They build friendship, they build resilience and hope. Today, many of these children themselves, ones who attended these camps before, have returned as trainers and mentors. Angammal's own son has become an anti-torture lawyer himself. Others now, some of them lead child rights NGOs and community initiatives. And to me, this is innovation. Innovation is not about legal tools or technology. It's also sometimes about recognizing that accountability and healing must go hand in hand. Justice is not complete, I think, when a judgment is delivered. I think it's a beginning. It is complete only when the survivors reclaim their dignity, become leaders, and transform the movement that once fought for them. I think these are a couple of innovations that I could mention from my work. Thank you.
Thank you. Fascinating, Edgar. Thank you so much. And I would absolutely echo, your approach to this, like this holistic approach towards, securing justice and accountability, because we know that it's not about one single legal tool, as you mentioned, but rather, bringing the communities together, reminding and making sure that we adopt these practices that are truly survivor-centered. And a great reminder for us all lawyers as well that, our work doesn't end when we secure a decision, a favorable decision, but there is a lot to do to make sure that those judgments securing justice are actually implemented and that reparations are realized in practice. And now, thank you so much. I'm just going to move on to Masafu, and I wonder if you relate to some of these challenges, based on your experience in Kenya. What are some of the barriers that you face, in your work against torture in Kenya?
Thank you so much, Renata. To start, that Kenya has legal infrastructure to prevent torture. And with that said, I'll join my colleague Edgar in saying that our biggest barrier has been impunity and the biggest conveyor belt for torture. And usually, torture does not occur in isolation. This impunity does not occur in isolation. This impunity is held and facilitated, enabled by the colonial criminalization laws that still exist in our legal textbook in the country. This torture and impunity is facilitated by the stigma and discrimination that is an infrastructure that has been built by the existing colonial criminalization laws that we still have in our textbook. And as a consequence of that, you find that it's very difficult, despite the legal SOGI milestones that we've made in Kenya, to agitate for the protection of sexual and gender minority Kenyans, refugees, and asylum seekers. You find that despite the existence of these legal protections that we have fought blood, sweat, and tears to have within the Kenyan legal system, the implementation has been extremely difficult because of impunity, which is facilitated by the criminalization laws that still exist in our legal textbooks. A good illustration will be that in 2018, Kenya's Court of Appeal banned the use of forced anal examination, which had historically been used as evidence to show that two consenting adults had engaged in adult same-sex conduct. This is despite the fact that forced anal examination is scientifically insignificant and cannot prove whatsoever cannot prove anything. So you find that despite the express ban of forced anal examinations, we still receive cases of forced anal examinations. I coordinate Kenya's public legal aid clinic, which is specifically for sexual and gender minorities. And I have coordinated the clinic for the past 8 years now. And despite the ban of forced anal examinations, we still receive cases of forced anal examinations, not as cases that cases that are going through our court system, but actually cases that actually being reported with police as perpetrators of forced anal examinations to continuously intimidate, oppress, and to legally intimidate LGBTQ plus Kenyans. So impunity continues to be one of the greatest barriers that we have faced when it comes to agitating for the prevention of torture. And oftentimes when it comes to sexual and gender minorities, torture in itself does not just manifest within police cells. It manifests in the ways that LGBTQ plus Kenyans are subjected to conversion violence. It manifests in the homes of LGBTQ plus Kenyans through arbitrary arrest, physical violence, mob violence, and the list is long. So the greatest undoing in the work that we continue to do remains to be impunity. Back to you, Renata.
Thank you so much, Masafu, for sharing that. And it's curious to see that there is a strong legal framework, in Kenya, and that there is an anti-torture act, that prohibits torture, and yet there are so many challenges in terms of implementing and making sure that violence against LGBTQ individuals is actually prosecuted as torture and not as other ordinary crimes when it does amount to torture in the definition. And I wonder, you mentioned the case that you successfully litigated on forced anal examinations. What do you think it was quite novel in that case, or what kind of approach was or innovative approach did you adopt that you think contributed to the success of that case? Or if you prefer to talk about a different initiative that you found successful, that's absolutely fine as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. So one of the innovative approaches that we adopted when we were litigating on the case of forced annual examinations, among other cases of torture that we have litigated, was that this was a victim-centered case where we were approaching the court to declare the ban on forced annual examinations on account of two actual Kenyans who had been subjected to forced annual examinations. That is number one. Number two is that we adopted movement lawyering, where we did extensive mapping on the extent of and the impact of forced annual examinations on LGBTQ plus persons who are in conflict or in contact with the law. So in parallel to strategic litigation, we also adopted community legal education, which was parallel to the strategic litigation, so that even as we got the good judgment from our courtrooms, it was important that LGBTQ plus persons were able it was important that for us LGBTQ plus persons, we were able to know, what do I do? What do I do when I go to the police station? What do I expect? How do I document? How am I able to know that this experience amounted to torture? So community paralegals were legally liberated to be able to identify cases of torture and accelerate these cases to legal aid lawyers. And number four is that we did a lot of strategic advocacy. We mapped out strategic partners, particularly the Kenya Medical and Doctors Associations, just so that they're able to amplify and declare that forced annual examination is banned and is no longer an unacceptable practice within our legal system. And finally, we were able to do a lot of petitions just to anchor the judgment that had come out of court. And finally, we were very particular about ensuring that each medical practitioner who actually undertook the exercise of forced annual examination were actually held to book. So we were bringing accountability to the individual persons who are actually undertaking forced annual examinations for deterrence purposes. So even as we are agitating for protection against torture, we are very keen to ensure that we are also shifting the norms that have historically cushioned the practice of torture. And beyond forced annual examinations, we have ensured that we are actively litigating on cases around conversion violence that have become a lived reality for 9 out of 10 of LGBTQ plus residents of Kenya.
Thank you so much, Masafo, for sharing that experience. And it's really good to see the approach that you took towards the litigation beyond the legal claim as well, and the work that is needed around the communities and with all the others that might be conducting these illegal practices. So thank you very much for that. I think now I'm just going to invite everyone. We're going to take a very short 5-minute interactive activity. Stay on. This will be an opportunity to learn from experiences from our audience and also a little break to our interpreter. So we won't be speaking during this time, but please open the Mentimeter link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code and enter the code that will be available on the screen. You will see then that you have an opportunity to share your answers, and then we'll show to the whole audience the answers that everyone has put, so that we can see how some of these challenges that we've been discussing and these approaches relate to your experiences as well. So just please provide us one sentence or short responses so that we can show to everyone in the audience. At the same time, just a reminder that you can send your questions via the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll collate and respond to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you. So for others, just please join through the link, and you can see the code that you need to include to join and share your responses. Thank you very much, everyone. It's really great to see the different approaches that people are adopting to combat torture, and what gives people hope in this fight as well. So we'll continue with our discussion. And now I'm just going to ask Bhubaneswari, please, if you could share with us what, in your experience, are some of the challenges that you face when you're working against torture in India. This could be structural barriers or legal or political or practical in your work. So please, over to you.
Thank you, Renata. And am I audible? Okay, so during my work time, I faced the three of the barriers like legal, political, and structural. The first one is the structural. Structural, more it is more likely cultural barriers because the area where I belong from, uh, torture is more normalized. Like I work with women and trans community, and they decades of torture actually normalized. They think that if husband or any other in-laws is torturing them, then it is their duty to, it is their right to do so. And after after that, when crime happens, we think just moving to police stations and registering complaints and all is, it is very simple, but it's more, it is very, the first step is the hardest step to take because there is no mobilization. No, the normalization is so hard that people, the awareness level is very low. And when I started working, I I I found a place where police station is declared that the area under this police station is zero crime area. But when I went to that place and researched what is really happening, people gave out that police are not taking complaints, and if they are going to write down complaints and lodge FIRs, police are pressurizing them not to do so, and that pressure also contains the financial pressure and tortures and custodial torture and sexual harassment over women. Then also comes the power dynamics in that structure. Like if in a village community, there are people who are more powerful, wealthy, and these communities are suppressing the poor and marginalized to not go to the police stations. Or they create hurdles like they're by giving bribes to police. They're just dragging the procedures which dishearten the victims and become barrier. Then comes legal barriers, like if the torture is happening to a person through police. In Indian law, there are some kind of protective laws for stakeholders like police and all. If like if I'm going to lodge any FIRs and complaint against any public officer, then I have to follow such certain procedures like 14 days of notice period, and the court here is not really working properly, and this also somehow um, lowers the courage of the people, and the political barrier. When if a person is gathering courage and coming to the courts through any means, courtroom is also not equal. Like a person who is coming from the villages and they're not dressed up properly, they don't have proper dress codes. Um, Judges also creates class in people, and they start mocking or pressurizing people that you shouldn't be fighting this case or this matter because you are not wealthy enough to fight the system. And this kind of barriers I face whenever I went to the field.
Thank you very much, Bhubaneswari. I think you speak to a point of the normalization and how these practices become accepted law enforcement tools in like criminal investigations or to marginalize communities as well, and then some of these legal and political barriers. But I wonder then, in terms of your work, what kind of innovation can you bring and do you bring to your work? And especially as you work closely with communities, what kind of community-based initiatives do you think are quite successful in combating torture in India?
Okay, so when I visited these villages, I came across the fact that there is no unity in the people. Like if a person is going to face this kind of structural barriers or any resistance from the police officers, then nobody is coming to help them or nobody is standing behind them. So first I started to create space between the people so that they can come up with their problems. They can speak up for themselves. So what I did, I created a space with service and justice with mindset. Like I created trust. Then I gathered some people from the village and started giving trainings to them so that they can be peers to the villagers, those who are not able to go to the police officers and all, or any other stakeholders. Then these peers helped a lot to mobilize people, and that's how we managed to gather courage in people and in the mass so that they can at least complain about the torture which is happening in the society. And then comes I took two strategies, which are first is creating spaces for them, and second is value based approaches. Like when there is a lot of bribery and systematic failures still exist in the Indian courts and all. So whenever you go to courts, the first thing comes to your mind is financial dependency or financial capacity. So whenever we do pro bono cases, there is no money to give to people who are taking bribes to the stakeholders of court and police officers. So we also started telling them our stories, and by these kind of approaches they also understand what we are going through, and this kind of value-based innovations like bringing empathy or dignity and showing gratitude and inclusion also help us a lot to to move towards innovation and bring justice to the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bunaswati. I think it's important to bring along, those the communities that are affected by this violence. And so it's really inspiring to see the work that you were doing with the communities to make sure that, they are aware of the rights and how they can advocate for themselves where they wish. So thank you so much for that. I think this might relate a little bit to the work that Kavuta also does in Kenya. And Kavuta, turning on to you, what are some of these challenges? Do you relate to some of the challenges that they mention, even though the contexts are so different in India and Kenya? Can we identify some common challenges? What, in your view, is the most significant one as you work against torture?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Renata, and thank you for putting this together. Lots of learning, lots of similarities, as you mentioned, across the different contexts. And I completely agree with my colleague from Kenya who spoke earlier on the existence of a lot of impunity that limits the success of torture cases. But beyond that, I think for us, we believe that the success of strategic litigation and other forms of litigation starts with what happens before, what happens immediately after torture cases are reported. So despite existence of, for Kenya, progressive laws, including the Prevention of Torture Act, progressive court decisions, most of the communities that are meant to benefit from these decisions and these laws are not aware of their existence. And as my colleague Osafu Makara, forgetting your name wrong, as my colleague shares, most communities are not aware of the procedures to take once cases of torture occur. Where do they turn to? Where do they report to? How do they preserve evidence? For me, as I started my legal career in one of the institutions here in Kenya, working on prevention of torture and response to the same. One of the cases, very strong cases actually, that we tried to file in courts was not successful because of a simple technical or procedural issues of not obtaining what we call an occurrence book number. That's an OB number that you get when you report cases in police stations. So with that realization, that has inspired a lot of the work we do, because a challenge towards getting successful court decisions is a lack of, procedural steps that were either not taken, evidence not preserved. And with that realization, that has, I think, inspired a lot of the work that we do. I think in the Kenyan context, we've seen a lot of videos circulating online, a lot of photos taken relating to cases of torture. But most times, because citizens, for example, are not aware of the evidentiary threshold that's required for, some of this evidence to be presented in court, some of these cases end up not being successful. So that has been one of the biggest gaps that we've been able to identify, and that has inspired the kind of work and approach that we've taken.
Thank you so much, Kavuta, for sharing that and some of the challenges, both legal in terms of the evidence and litigating it before Kenyan courts. I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about your experience, either with communities or throughout in support of the cases that you find particularly novel or inspiring that could be used for, the context by other practitioners, as well as if you have a specific example that you found particularly successful, you're welcome to share as well.
Yeah, okay. I think for us, our approach has been very simple, very practical. As I shared, of course, with the existence of progressive laws and policies, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, it's the communities that are meant to benefit from this and not aware and are not able to read and understand, then they cannot benefit from the same. So our approach has been simplifying some of these discussions, some of this available information among communities. And we've done a lot of awareness, especially with the most vulnerable groups that are often forgotten or left behind, including urban refugee women and girls, including sexual and gender minority groups, which was our partnership through Redress. So for us, we conduct such sessions where we simplify the legal information as much as possible in language that, communities are able to understand. And then because we're not able to reach everybody, we also use other channels, including such webinars, but even beyond such webinars that can be a bit, difficult for everyone to access, we use other channels, including TikTok lives, including Instagram lives, including going live on X to have such discussions so that we can reach as many people as possible. We also simplify the law in language that communities can understand, and we're able to distribute these materials among communities. And as I said, most times survivors of torture don't know where to turn to. So we've been able to, summarize some of the referral partners, some of which are, some whom I've seen have joined the webinar today, just, simplifying the available avenues, the numbers, the emails, who people can reach out to, and even simplifying the procedures that communities can take once cases of torture have been experienced. We've seen this has worked very well. And in one of the sessions, actually, a trans woman who is an urban refugee from Uganda shared that she was not aware that what she experienced amounted to torture, and really wished she had gotten this information, a few years back. And for us, such feedback is always testament to the success of strategic litigation begins with awareness. And I think this is a component that's mostly forgotten or not paid attention to, but with empowered communities and empowered human rights defenders, I believe we can see we're going to experience more and more success when it comes to filing and litigating cases in court.
Thank you so much, Kavuta. And it's really interesting to hear some of the ways that, like the channels that you use, including the social media channels and others to reach broader audiences and to bring into, translating sometimes these legal discussions or complex, political contentious issues so that they are accessible. This is so important, and it's not an easy thing to do, to simplify but still communicate, the complexities around it. So thank you so much for that. I will encourage, I have seen that some people have already posted your questions in the Q&A chat. So please do include other questions that you may have, and we'll collate and come back to those in a moment. I will now move on to Mary Duomo, who I introduced at the start of the session. And Mary, can you hear us all right? And yep, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary, for joining us. We would like to also ask you, in the context that you work, do you relate to some of the issues that were shared earlier in terms of the structural or legal barriers that you face working against torture in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much, Renata, for that. I can relate to a lot of them, just that we here in Nigeria, we have much more challenges. So Nigeria is quite a peculiar country of its own. We have a lot of laws governing every aspect of our lives, but implementation has always been an issue. So it's very interesting to know that we have the Anti-Torture Act of 2017, and it's well, the content is so enriched. However, there are gaps in it. So to me, if I'm to mention the challenges, I will start with the laws itself, Nigerian laws itself. Um, the Anti-Torture Act that define torture clearly is limited to some extent. It's limited in the sense that it limits it to act, the pain or suffering done by an authority, of which is not just an authority doing that to a subject. If you look at the examples of torture it highlighted in section 2 of it, these are things we see in daily life. We see all these things at home, submerging someone's head in water or burning someone with cigarette or candles. There are a lot of things that we see in our daily lives. So it means torture, the Anti-Torture Act is now limiting it to acts done by an authority only, which is wrong. So I see that as a challenge as well. When you bring an individual before the court on such or relying on that law, someone can easily rely on section 1, which gives a definition of torture, limiting it to an authority only. So how will you enforce such law against a person? So another challenge I look at, another challenge here in Nigeria is our religious belief. We have a lot of religious belief. The Muslim communities, they believe that when you beat a spouse, it means you are correcting her. It is not torture, it's correction. Or maybe someone steals someone, you amputate that person's leg or eye, you flog that person seriously. They see it as punishment, but this is torture in its reality. So another angle in the religious perspective is the yeah, I will look at maybe the Christian society, which is the Celestine worshippers. Yes, they believe that when you beat someone strongly, you are casting out the demons out of that person. Maybe someone is barren, and you are beating that person to drive away that spirit that makes the person barren. Now, no matter how educated someone is, you can't outrightly say that torture in Nigeria is based on ignorance. It will surprise you to know that someone who is well educated, subjecting his or herself into such religious practices where they are being beaten as prayers. And you can imagine the level of vulnerability. So it is high risk, high rate of vulnerability in Nigeria that also causes torture. And this goes down to fear. What happened to someone who is in detention? Someone who has been arrested for maybe offenses they know nothing of, maybe friend charges, and this person is kept in custody for a very long time, sometimes more than a year or 2 years. Some, when you now meet them and you tell them that, okay, look, keeping you here under the guise of investigation is totally wrong. So let's see how we can fight for your fundamental human rights, seek for damages and all that. But they feel to correct that wrong. They feel, okay, once I am out, I just want to go, and that is all for me. So is another challenge of itself, because you now notice that the person you are trying to fight for is withdrawing from such case, and you cannot go to the court without the victim permission. So that is it. It's a challenge of its own to me. And then we, just like others have, my other colleagues have said, I can agree less. We have cases of impunity in Nigeria. We have so much of it, and it is so overwhelming, such that the more we are trying to create awareness on torture, these challenges seems so overwhelming. Looks like we are not even doing at all. Imagine someone flogging someone, or you feel like it is my right, it is my duty to do this to this person, whereas it is not. And no matter how you say it, it doesn't get to make sense. So in my work conference, I will say that withdrawal from the case, ignorance is part of it. Even religious beliefs are also part of it, and the law itself.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Such a comprehensive, overview of some of the context in Nigeria, and I think you're touching some relevant issues that first, like the legal aspects and the barriers that I think other colleagues also share, that having a strong law is not enough. It's about how you implement it and interpret it, and also how one size doesn't fit all, because there are different people and religious beliefs and cultural aspects that we need to take into account when we are working against torture. And I think the issue that you mentioned in relation to withdrawals and potentially fear of reprisals as well when we bring such cases is something that I imagine all the panelists will also relate to. And so I wonder in this context, if you could share with us like one innovative approach or initiative that you found successful to combat some of these challenges in your work, that would be great, because I think we can learn from this experience to adopt in other contexts.
Okay, so thank you. In our work, one of the innovative distinct shift we take is collecting and documenting violations of human rights generally. So this help us. We have a platform where we call the LADOCT. That's a lawyers alert documentation tool. So we collect a violation of rights, and that give us an estimated number. We data, sorry, yes, we get to know that okay, these are the cases that are prevalent within the social years or within this context, and we try to see how we will address it from the very root by through policy or law reforms and all that. So we go into judicial reviews for possible reforms that is addressing the root cause. So if you look at the Anti-Torture Act itself also, is one of the things we look into. Like I was identifying the fact that the definition of it under Section 1 is limited to acts perpetrated by those in authority, leaving out the general citizens who commit the same thing. So it's a gap that needs to be filled. So we identify gaps like this and we try to fill it up. And then another thing we embark on a strategic impact litigation, where we go to court and we file suit on behalf of a general community. Yes, it must not be an individual person. It has to be a group of persons. Now, a torture-related case that we carried out is a case against the federal government to enforce the fundamental human right of those living in the IDP camp. Like people have been staying in different IDP camps, 34 IDP camps in Benue State. We have those who have lived there for over a decade. So you looking at their living condition, it is inhuman, it is degrading, and the definition of torture does not limit itself to physical brutality. Yes, it can be in this context, but what happened to the mental aspect of it? And torture should not just be limited to trying to obtain an information or maybe investigation angle. So that is how broad we look at torture, and we try to also enforce their right to and human dignity and their personal liberty as well. So they should be returned back to their ancestral home. So that is how we look at torture in a holistic angle. Yes. So another aspect that we do is awareness creation. Yes, we do massive campaigns on torture, and a lot of youth out there who are mostly the victims of torture, they don't get to know at what point is their rights violated. Yes. So we do campaigns. Sometimes we go to schools. We do catch them young, program where we go to maybe primary schools and we try to tell them that when someone do this to you, this is that. So it's not just it's not just accountability aspect of it that we look at. We look at preventive measures. So we engage maybe IDP camps or other gatherings, communities where we educate them about their rights to combat torture.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much. It's so interesting to hear about your experience and the different approaches you adopt. I think we've got quite a few questions from the audience. And so I'm just going to try to direct to some of the speakers, but feel free to respond to other questions that you find relevant. We also, just to say, as Redress works against torture, and we also express on the international law against torture, I'm just going to try to briefly start responding a couple of them, if I may, and the panel allows me, just to kick off this Q&A session. I think there were some interesting points on what actually amounts to torture and how can we differ violence from torture. And I think it will be interesting to hear from others in the panel how they do that in practice. But just to say that from an international law perspective, we go by the definition that exists in the UN Convention Against Torture. And it is not limited to physical violence, but it also includes psychological harm as well. And in relation to the point of discrimination and the exclusion of communities, the way that the definition of torture in the international law can be used is also to tackle the discriminatory roots that enable torture to take place. And this is because the definition of torture has different elements, and one of them is the infliction of severe pain or suffering. That can be, as I mentioned, physical or mental. But also one of the elements is the purpose of torture, that the violence, the pain or suffering can be inflicted not only to extract a confession or to obtain information from the person, but it can also be used to intimidate or to discriminate that individual. And the final element is that it has to involve some sort of involvement of a state authority or public official or someone acting in an official capacity. So I'm not going to go into the very legal and technical definitions here, but just so that we have an idea of how do we differentiate whether violence amounts to torture, and we can also use this definition and the strategic litigation and other initiatives to not only tackle and seek justice and reparations for that individual survivor, but also some international courts and bodies capable of including other measures of reparation of non-repetition. So I think this kind of starts to respond to one of the questions about how is the ambit of torture defined, and beyond accountability, is there a space to discuss, the root causes of torture? And I will post in the chat one of the cases that was litigated by Redress in a different region in Peru, that was litigated before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, in which the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for the first time identified that torture on grounds of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is prohibited in the international law, and it included several reparation measures that address the root causes that enable torture to take place in that instance in Peru, and other measures that could be relevant to different contexts, and some of them that we discussed here today. So I just wanted to give that the brief note before we go into some of the questions to the panelists. I think we have one question directly in relation to the context in Kenya. I'm just going to pose all the questions to the panelists and then give you perhaps 3 minutes each to respond to some of these questions. One of the points in relation to Kenya that was raised is the issue of impunity. So how does the landscape, the political landscape, play in this impunity barrier? And for example, it was mentioned that there's a lack of prosecutions for the shooting, killing, and disappearances of demonstrators by both the police and unidentified people in the anti-government protests that we've seen in Kenya. And also some other political issues related to the ICC, so dropping the case against the former president. So I think I'll leave this one with Masafu and Kavuta. And then to Edgar and Bhubaneswari, the question that we have for you is how does violence becomes different from torture? And in the Indian context where judiciary has more liberty to take action against state actors, there is no specific anti-torture law or definition of torture in the domestic legal framework in India. And I will open to all of them, and perhaps Mary, you can take one of this as well. So does torture only mean physical violence? How do we incorporate this other elements of mental harm and including psychological torture such as prolonged solitary confinement, keeping a person in complete darkness, sleep deprivation, threats, humiliation, intimidation, constant fear, and denial of contact with family or legal counsel? The question here is how can grassroots communities recognize and prevent these other forms of torture? And finally, in the criminal legal system that operates in generally unequal social environment with specific marginalizations and criminalizations of communities, how can torture be defined? How is torture defined? And beyond accountability, how can we address some of the root causes? And here again, the question links to grassroots movements responding to these issues. I think both of these last two questions relate to a few of the contexts. So I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start first with Masafu, if you can respond to a couple of these questions briefly, and then I'll move on to Kavuta and to other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata. I will start in response to the question that has been raised by our colleague from Kenya, is that I'll start by saying that Kenya's constitution, torture is an absolute, prevention against torture is an absolute right in our current constitution. And that said, the current political core in our country, in Kenya, has created an environment where impunity thrives, that there's no respect for the rule of law, that court orders are ignored, that we have abductions happening in broad daylight. And as a consequence, they've created a system where cases of torture can be, for lack of a better word, compensated, which has been a very disturbing trend in Kenya. But just to affirm what my colleague has been saying, that the culture of impunity has, for the last 3 or 4 years, been cemented by the current political class, which has made a habit of ignoring rule of law. Undermining the rule of law, ignoring court orders. We've had cases of abduction where fellow activists have been abducted in broad daylight, have been disappeared, and there has been no recourse. So such cases have gone unchecked, and as a consequence, the culture of impunity has continued to thrive, thereby undermining what redress for victims of torture has looked like, and also what the respect for the rule of law has looked like. So even as Kenyans are going for the next elections, we are hoping that this is the system that has been breeding impunity, that this is a system that you get to do away with. So just to affirm what my colleague has said, in the past, we have seen cases that have made it as far as the International Criminal Court, where witnesses have been disappeared, witnesses have been compromised, all as a consequence of the culture of impunity that continues to be cultivated by the political core. So just to affirm that that is indeed one of the greatest barriers that we continue to see. So impunity remains a very ingrained barrier, not only just in the overall social justice framework, but also within the fabric of Kenya as a country. So it manifests in the everyday lives of Kenyans, and this culture of impunity and the effects and the brunt of this culture of impunity is felt almost double or triple by LGBTQ plus and sexual and gender minorities, whereby police would outrightly decline to even document cases of outright abuse and torture. So yes, just to affirm that this is a very live and lived reality for a lot of Kenyans.
Thank you so much, Masafo, for that explanation on the political issues. I'm going to move on to Kavulta, and perhaps Kavulta, if I may encourage you to respond a little bit about the grassroots movements, in response to specifically issues of specific marginalization, criminalization that enables torture to take place. So how can these grassroots communities and organizations, activists, defenders respond to those issues in a transformative way?
Yeah, thank you, Renata. And I think I want to agree with my colleague from Kenya on the issue of impunity, and even a question or a comment posted on the chat regarding how impunity contributes towards all of this. I think just to add on to the challenge we are facing in Kenya, we have our quote-unquote independent policing oversight authority, which is mandated to investigate these cases. But it's come under scrutiny over the last couple of years, actually, because we've not seen a lot of cases successfully prosecuted in courts. I think this again goes back to the issue of corruption, where for us, sometimes it feels like it's the same officers that have been mandated to investigate their fellow officers against crimes committed. So I think even as we're having these conversations, we must ask ourselves whether some of these bodies are indeed as independent as they present themselves to be, because if they were, I think we would see a lot more success in terms of litigation and prosecution of officers in court. And to the last question on on the chat box, I want to agree that indeed torture does not occur in a vacuum, and we need to address this by looking at all the intersectionality of issues, including economic challenges where people are not able to, successfully afford lawyers and access to support towards litigation of their cases. So we must address and look at the intersectionality of issues and empower grassroots organizations that can be able to successfully empower their communities and support them towards ensuring justice, because yes, torture does not occur in a vacuum.
Thank you very much, Kavulta. Thank you for that. I might just go around and go to Mary first. Mary, I think I'm going to ask you to respond to one of the questions that we received on how can grassroots communities recognize and prevent often invisible forms of torture, or those that, impact like mental health or inflict mental harm, psychological harm in survivors of torture.
Okay, thank you very much. So in response to that question, I think I believe that when we carry out more community engagements and sensitizing people on their rights, generally, they get to be aware of their environment and the laws that seek to govern them. And then the one striking thing for me is implementation of our laws. When you look at Section 9 of the Anti-Torture Act here in Nigeria, it prescribes 25 years imprisonment for perpetrators. And since 2017 to this very moment, no Nigerian officer has been convicted under that law, which is very, very bad. It does not speak well for us. People are being compensated. When you are tortured and you take the matter to court, court will award judgment in your favor with a fine, and then the agency will now be forced to pay such a fine, while the main perpetrator itself is just there, does not even feel the impact of the punishment. So I see that when we become deliberate in enforcement and judicial enforcement, that we affect, that will go in a very long way in shaping it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that. I think we could hear just breaking at the very end, but I think we got it in. Thank you very much. I'm just now going to move to Edgar, please. If you could explain to us, how does violence become different from torture in India, specifically in the Indian context?
Thank you, Renata. Before answering the question, can I please request you if I can use the complete 3 minutes in order to answer a couple of other questions and the main third question that you had in the script as well, so that I think I really wanted to do that.
Absolutely. Feel free to do so.
As regards the difference and distinction between violence in general and torture in itself, legally speaking, it blows at the center of the legal issue in accountability of torture cases in India, because most often the provision that is used is the violence provision that is used for any violence that is inflicted upon by any civilian, which is used as in the same case of against a public official, which I think changes the whole story, because the UN Convention Against Torture in itself is structured in a manner that it protects citizens from violence against citizens from the state. And that therefore becomes an important distinction, because in Indian criminal law, we don't have a specific law saying that state agents inflicting torture, and it does not actually include the different elements of it, include the mental harm, psychological, and different aspects of it. So I think that difference in itself creates a huge barrier in accountability. And I wanted to answer the other question as regards the root causes of police torture, and also do you work on that as well? Yes, there have been a lot of recommendations from the National Police Commission of India on different aspects or the causative agents for causing torture in India, like the stress and the mental harm, strain that the police officers had to go through, their inherent instinct to cause torture, and training of police officers as per the Mendes principles, so on and so forth. So we've been able to, in our earlier days, we've been able to get in touch with police officers and police training academies to train police officers on a human rights-based approach to policing. So I think that touches at the root cause of the problem. And most importantly, your third question of how can the global anti-torture movement better integrate leadership from emerging lawyers? I believe the future of this global anti-torture movement, as someone who've been both at the grassroots and at the international space now, depends on reversing the traditional flow of knowledge, which is now too often strategies are developed by globally instituted mechanisms and then expected to fit to local realities, which doesn't work. But torture is deeply shaped by history, politics, social structures, and policing cultures of those local realities. And it changes from one country to another. One single international law, one convention against torture cannot fairly apply in its original sense. It needs to be vernacularized. A movement that seeks to end torture must therefore be informed by those working close to the affected communities. And that means investing in emerging lawyers, grassroots advocates, not simply as implementers of global agendas, but as partners who shape them. It also means that creating more opportunities. I was about to mention, I think I will also have a talk with you about this as well later on, that there must be a platform that should be created to facilitate direct exchange between grassroots organizations across the regions. A lawyer documenting torture in India might have much to learn from a community organizer in Latin America. A rehabilitation practitioner in Africa may develop approaches that inspire advocates in Asia or Europe. So therefore, I believe these conversations should not always have to pass through international institutions. They should happen directly between those who work on a day-to-day basis with communities. And therefore, I think these are some of the things that would effectively help the global anti-torture movement learning from the grassroots. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edgar. Really, really great ideas and practical, suggestions on how we can move from here as well, and involve more of this, anti-torture lawyers around the world as we continue our work. I'm just going to give the chance to Babas Fares, if you want to respond to any of the questions. Babas Fares, if you want to respond to any of the questions that we have that have been posted so far, or to respond to what you think the next step should be for now. Thank you.
Hello. So I want to respond to the same question which has responded by Edgar, and along with the root cause and prevention, because right now we are planning to make some steps and make some models to prevent all these kind of tortures. So the difference between the torture and violence is more broad. Like if anybody is doing any kind of physical, mental torture, then it's called violence. But in Indian context, if that violence is done by any state actors like police officers especially, it is torture. And the line between these two words is very thin, and there is no recognition of police torture in Indian law. Like there is no specific statute, but there are some cases like D.K. Basu where the Supreme Court advised to follow some guidelines, like guidelines for arrest for the police officers, and in another case of Neelavati Behra versus state of Odisha, it has been mentioned that if any torture is caused by the state actors, then they should have the strict liability. So, what we are doing in the current scenario is following this kind of um, um, case laws, and um, not specific case laws, these kind of case laws to navigate through torture, and to prevent the root cause of the torture is to mobilize. Like we are mobilizing at the grassroots level to the villagers peoples, but right now we are focusing to mobilize police officers as well, like how to bring them um, to the PRA model, like how we are mobilizing villagers through participatory rural uprising. We want to include officers to those awareness programs also, and then we're trying to introduce theater of oppressed during the awareness programs or workshop with police officers, and through that workshops we want to develop their morality, and through this kind of process we're trying to prevent the grassroots cause of this torture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we're approaching the end of our webinar, and I just wanted to really congratulate, all the innovative lawyers for the fantastic work that you're doing. It's truly inspiring, and I'm sure our audience is going to agree that, your experience is so useful, and the knowledge and the approaches that you share today can be so useful for other contexts and other practitioners and lawyers elsewhere. So for those who want to find out a little bit more, please go to our website. We have also published some interviews and some blogs with our innovative lawyers. And we would like to also invite you to our next webinar under the Redress Solidarity Program, which is also Innovating Against Torture, New Strategies for the Anti-Torture Movement. This will take place on the 18th of September, 2026 at 4 p.m. CET. We will also hear from other innovative lawyers in different contexts. We have launched a poll, a feedback poll, please, that I think should be on your screen now. And we would really appreciate if you could spend just a minute or two answering these questions. It will really help us improve, the future webinars, and we want to listen to you and your contributions. Thank you very much again to all our speakers, to our audience for the fantastic questions. Please visit our website, and if you have any other questions or you felt that anything wasn't answered, please send us an email, and we can also facilitate some of these connections. As Edgar mentioned, the whole idea of this platform is to connect different practitioners, different lawyers from a wide range of countries and contexts. So we can also facilitate those connections. Please don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great end of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.